Good evening. Good evening and welcome. This is so exciting. I'm here to welcome everyone to this evening's discussion. My name is Josh Miele. I'm a blind designer of technology, accessible technology. I am an author, a disability scholar, and I also am a MacArthur Fellow. So this is the first in a four-part series that the Disability Cultural Center is hosting. We're very creatively calling it the MacArthur series. And we will have a variety of conversations. I'm so excited to be starting off with this one. Before I introduce our panelists, or really just pass it over to our panelists, I want to thank the John D. and Catherine T. MacArthur Foundation for their generous funding of this series. It's part of an initiative or a festival that they're doing called MacArthur Fellows at 45. The MacArthur Fellows program is 45 years old this year. And so they're funding a series of events and conversations that include MacArthur Fellows that, as usual, center voices of activists, artists, creatives, and people making change in the world in a positive way in order to bring those conversations to light. And so that is exactly what we're doing tonight. I also want to thank the San Francisco Disability Cultural Center, Emily especially, and all of the staff here. Thank you for organizing this. Thank you for being host to this evening's conversation and this series. My role really is done. I'm going to get out of the way and I'm going to say thank you, of course, to everyone here for coming, but thank you to Subini Ancyannamma, to Sami Schalk, and to Mel Chen in advance for what I am absolutely certain is going to be a fascinating, very interesting, and important conversation about disability and race. So thank you very much.
Hi, Sami. I think you might be first on our list.
Yes. Hi. I was also just pulling up that Google Doc. Hi, everyone. My name is Sami Schalk. I use she, her pronouns. I am a fat, light-skinned Black woman in a very colorful pink and purple room that is my home office. I am calling in today from the land of the Ho-Chunk, that we call Dejope, when known colonially as Madison, Wisconsin. And as much as I wish I could have bopped over to San Francisco to have fun in person, I'm grateful to be able to be there virtually. Mel, you're next.
Hi, my name is Mel Chen. I guess I can say I'm a professor of gender and women's studies across the Bay at UC Berkeley. I'm also a board member for the Queer Women of Color Media Arts Project, and that's just as important to me. I am Asian with short hair, and I'm wearing a dark red shirt and black pants and bright reflective yellow sneakers. I just want to say I'm so honored to participate in this discussion. Thank you all for seeing through your commitment to put on this series dreamed up by Alice. And I also just want to say that I kind of teared up earlier today talking to my sweetie about like how sacred it is to come in person to a place and be there together. So I deeply appreciate each of you being here for this conversation.
Hi, everyone. I'm Subini Ancyannamma. I'm an associate professor at Stanford University in the Graduate School of Education. Can you all hear me okay? Okay, thank you. Man, what else? I dance, I run, I lift weights. I like to do all things that are not work related too, because I think sometimes we tell a very narrow story about ourselves. So I lead a Black Girls Run group in the city. If anyone wants to join, we walk, we run. And I am a Black and South Asian woman who has curly hair and with some blue in it and some big earrings and a green top. So we're really excited to be here with you all. Similar to Mel, I think I'm feeling really emotional to be able to honor Alice. Alice was someone I consider a friend and somebody who inspired me. So this work, I'm so glad MacArthur is putting it on. I'm so glad for Josh and Emily and all of the folks at the Disability Cultural Center. So thank you all for having us. I'm excited to talk tonight.
Okay, so we've choreographed this. It's going to be a little bumpy, but we decided not to have a single MC. So we're going to kind of swap questions. And I'm going to start. So with our introductions out of the way, why don't we start with the first prompt, which I'd love to hear answers from each of you, Sami and Subini, and then we'll move to the next one. This series, as you've heard, started with a dream from Alice Wong, who dreamed up so many things that fought for greater visibility for disabled Black, Indigenous people of color. So I would love to invite both of you to share more about what it means to you to speak about racial and disability justice and solidarity in the context of honoring your friend Alice. Subini, do you want to start?
I took a COVID test, but so I took my mask off because I had this brilliant idea to bring my phone so I didn't have to lug my computer on the BART, but then I realized I needed my glasses. So anyway, just the fun complications of an aging body. I want to begin by saying that Alice Wong was a good friend, first and foremost. I don't think you can be a disabled oracle without being a person who loved her community the way Alice did. To be clear, Alice was also whip smart and engaged in thoughtful analysis about the barriers disabled people of color face. And it's important to me that we name the parts of Alice that others may not have known. She was a good friend who loved pie and listened closely. She loved sending cards and lifting others up. And she was hilarious and snarky. And that was my favorite part about her. She was just a lovely human being. I also want to say really clearly that I think Alice fought for more than just visibility. I know her book was disability visibility, so I understand that. But I don't think any of her writing, any of her talks were ever simply about being seen to be seen. It worries me when we adopt the oversimplified language of the media and talk about attacks on, say, DEI as about diversity. That's an analysis that ignores history. And Alice was a student of sociology and history. We cannot oversimplify conversations about having Black disabled people or other disabled people of color in the room simply to diversify white viewpoints. Instead, what I want us to think about that Alice was fighting against systematic exclusion that had been the law, policy, and practice for decades. Alice was fighting against systemic intersecting oppressions of racism and ableism. She didn't always use that language, but that is what she was fighting for. And Alice was fighting for disabled people of color because she knew we had something to offer that the world needed. That is what it is to be a disabled oracle, to look back into history, to engage memory, to name injustice, and to recognize where injustice will take it if it's not fought against, and to recognize how we achieve a justice by centering those at the margins. So what it means to me to remember Alice is to continue her legacy by being clear with our language and our commitments, especially in this moment of attack. We exist to do more than diversify viewpoints and rooms. Black disabled people and disabled people of color's existence is a gift to the world. We are leaders who know how the systems work and ways to work around unjust systems, while we simultaneously work to tear them down. The world just has to decide if it will listen. What Alice did was with that was she made the world listen with her ferocity and power.
Sami?
Thanks, Subini. I probably should have said up top, I've already said to my co-panelists that I'm having some slow processing of brain stuff today because of the effects of police violence in Madison, Wisconsin, where I live, and being involved with things on the ground. So I prepared no comments, and I'm just winging every answer. So just know that. Um, when Alice passed, I was in San Juan, Puerto Rico for a conference and woke up to text messages about it. And that morning, we were supposed to have a book panel for my friend and co-author Gina B. Kim to celebrate her new book, Care Work, which I highly recommend. Or not Care Work, oh my gosh, Infrastructures of Care. Care Work is Leah's book. And we shifted the panel to really talk about Alice and give folks some space for grief. And then those of us that happened to be at the National Women's Studies Association conference got together by next to the hotel pool, pulled up a laptop for people who wanted to be there virtually, and we just shared stories about Alice. And I think one thing that was very clear in our gathering and collective mourning in that moment was wanting to make sure that Alice's legacy never gets whitewashed, that it doesn't become sanitized, that it doesn't lose the snarky edge and the sexualized edge and the ability to address like raw, rough, real things, to talk about pain in ways that often we hide as disabled people because we want to present ourselves in more normative and acceptable ways. And so for me, yeah, Alice inspired me to be more honest and vulnerable in my writing. She connected me to so many people. I think that is the other thing. We talk about her as an oracle, but I also sometimes think of her as like this network hub of just, she knew so many people and cared about so many people and kept tabs on folks, and whenever she had a project, she knew exactly who to pull in for those things. And so for me, the last project that I worked on with Alice was a gathering of disabled scholars of color in San Francisco. Subini was there. And this was an idea that Alice came up with to have us have space to think about the state of race in the field of disability studies and what it's like to be a disabled scholar of color in this field that has historically been very, very white. It has gotten better, but there's, it's not, it's not there yet. And so for me, being able to continue the work of that collective that came out of that kind of retreat experience, funded by Alice, funded by all that grant money that she was just pouring back into community. I want to make sure that I'm continuing to pay attention to that and to recognize, I think, the responsibility that I feel now, realizing that I'm technically a senior scholar. Is that how that works? Like, it's wild. It doesn't feel like that. But Alice did so much to make sure that the people who were coming up after her had support and resources and visibility to be able to do their work. And so I feel a responsibility to do that work as well now.
Sorry, y'all. Like we said, a little bumpy. Thank you, Sami, for just kind of grounding us in the love for Alice and the way that you're taking up the work. It's so important. Now I'm looking for where I'm supposed to be. Okay. Starting with thinking about Alice also makes me think of the importance of calling the ancestors in to honor the people and communities that brought us to this moment today for disability justice. How do you both bring memory and memorial into your work to bring legacy into the movement? We'll have Mel answer then, Sami.
Okay. Oh, I blanked out when you asked the question, but it was basically the question that we had.
Memory, how you bringing in.
Oh, okay. Ancestors. Okay. Okay. Yeah. So I'll be honest, calling in the ancestors is not something that comes naturally yet or still even easily to me, unless maybe I can think about animals. As for humans, I have to probably go to therapy a lot longer to understand why it's complicated for me. But absolutely, like the grounding feeling for that, recognizing the people and communities that brought us to this moment feels absolutely critical. Or even rather, recognizing that everything is also kind of trans-temporal. Like all the times come together in this moment. I'm thinking of Toni Morrison's rememory and other ways of thinking differently or radically about time. I'm going to share a specific example. I live in Alameda County, Ohlone land. They recently made a decision to enact a policy of reparations. And this particular enactment had to do with a particular city that had practiced redlining and other things around Black homeowners, home ownership. So someone posted in the Berkeley subreddit this news, and the top comment was, "Man, the nerve of doing this in a place that never had slavery." And I could see where they were coming from. Like there's a production of knowledge that enables this person to talk like this. It's like part of a larger critique of wokeism. But of course, it ignores redlining. It ignores that covenants are still in my friends' memories when they bought a house, ignores the slavery of indigenous people, the violence of settlement, ignores the everywhere of racial capitalism that was built on slavery, and so on, right? And coming back to time, because we know that crip time and what is called POC time is real and challenges clock time and colonial time. Time gets stretched, extending the timeline for and normalizing something like genocide as a minor present. And as we know, this was true throughout the history of occupied Palestine. Because those are who are being most heavily criminalized are understood as primitive, extinct, delayed, or backwards. And I mean by delayed also this sort of meaning of disability. And as another explicit example, I'm thinking about Sami's work on the Black Panthers and their integrated approach to disability, including supporting protests at UC Berkeley. And that changes or re-represents the very terrain in which we in Berkeley and Oakland move. So that very much influences my teaching and my conversations with my students. The history of eugenics at UC Berkeley requires foregrounding if we are to come to terms with what is needed now. But there is a strong cadre of folks at Berkeley making that real. And there's a DCC at Berkeley run by N.Y.E. Kwong. It's doing beautiful stuff. So yes, I'm all about memory, memorial, and also grieving in the present for what is happening now, who is being murdered, who is being disappeared in the airports, whose families are being broken up. That is what continues right now to happen and what will most likely happen as a result of today. Lives that we insist are absolutely grievable. And I don't mean grievance, which is an institutional or legal process that has been actually richly misused, often against people of color. So it just feels important to have witnessing of the loss of lives, the repudiations, the violences, and reinstalling memory and memorial. I'll stop there. Yeah.
Hey, this is Sami again. Yeah, I think I'm of two minds. One, along the lines of ancestors. I think I was already doing this as a queer person, and now I find myself doing it more in relationship to disability of claiming people as ancestors, right? Not just biologically. So for me, that's very much like Audre Lorde, Octavia E. Butler. And so I have pictures of them and quotes from them and their books and things all around me as reminders. I'm looking over this way because there's one here. So I think that is one way that I, calling in those ancestors, I mean, citing those folks, and naming them as Black and disabled people is important to me. But in the broader sense of memory, Mel mentioned my work in Black disability politics and um, remembering and kind of representing work by Black activists as disability justice work, or at least as disability politics. That was an important part of it. But for me, also an important part of memory there and bringing legacy into the work was interviewing the contemporary Black disabled activists and making sure that their names and the names of their organizations and the work that they're doing is in this academic book, that like maybe this thing will outlast all the social media sites that are, disappearing for us, or things are getting shut down, and trying to make sure that I'm helping to document what we're doing from people who don't always have the time and capacity to document it themselves because they're doing the work, right? And so that's what I find myself doing a lot these days, is thinking about how do I make sure that the people I see doing important work are being uplifted, documented, archived, so that, those folks are the future Audre Lordes for other people, right? People are gonna find Alice's work long after she's gone and feel the same kind of connection and inspiration as I do for Audre Lorde. So yeah, making sure that we keep those things wherever they need to be, and use every means. Like using social media and virtual spaces is great. And I still think there's value in like these paper books that are in somebody's library somewhere, because sometimes that might be the thing that people find as well. Subini, yeah.
Thanks, Sami. I think I would echo everything that Mel and Sami have already said about the systemic, and how they're so purposeful about naming memorial and memory and grief. I will add, like, being a disabled Black woman with a community of Black disabled people and disabled people of color means that we also experience so much early death in our communities. So memory and memorials are essential. So just to really personalize it, saying the names of people who died is essential to me. The month before Alice died, a close friend and colleague, Dr. Greg Prieto, died of colorectal cancer. As a queer Latinx man who was in his early 40s, this was another heartbreak. And so I'm looking for ways, and I'm finding ways to honor both him and Alice. I say their names often, I cite them, I quote them, I introduce them to their work to my students, and I let their work guide me. So I want to name like the individual griefs, because I think it's really important to name the systemic, the collective grief that we are experiencing as our country is being attacked, as marginalized people are being attacked. And I want to recognize that at that same time, we're also experiencing a lot of individual grief of losing people from our communities. And we can hold both and name both. The only other thing I want to add is, Sami's part about being very purposeful about including Black disabled activists that are in the now doing this work is so, so important. And my contribution is often, instead of focusing on activists, I focus on incarcerated youth. And I go across the country and I interview them. Because similarly, I do not want these disabled youth of color, because that's who the majority of who's in our youth prisons. In case you're wondering, it's majority disabled youth of color and queer youth of color who are in our youth prisons. And so my goal is to not let them be forgotten, to make sure that their words are our center. And it's a way for me to also, it is grief-filled work because we are incarcerating these brilliant young people who deserve so much better. And it is also a way to deal with grief by doing something about it. So I think there's all these ways that memory and memorial and grief impact racial and disability justice.
So this question of legacy also brings us to kind of our own journeys. So I'm wondering if we can each talk about our, yeah, how we got to this work at the intersection of race and disability and what it's been like to be inside of and maybe on the edges of disability studies to fight for more attention for race and to the kinds of disability politics that we have.
I just keep taking my glasses on and off, so this is fun right now. So Sammy's heard this story before because we talked about this at the Disability Scholars of Color Collective, but I don't come from a disability studies background. I'm unique that I am an educator. I was a high school special education teacher who worked in a large public urban high school with mostly Black and brown kids. And as those students began to disappear from my classroom, I found that many of them were ending up incarcerated. So I began to teach in youth prisons. And what I found there is exactly what you would expect, which is these kids are brilliant, these kids are wonderful, these kids are hilarious, these kids are kids. And yet they're bearing the brunt of an inequitable world. They're being punished for born without privilege. And so to me, when I went to graduate school, I wanted to make sure that was represented in the research. And when I searched, I could not find research that addressed their lives at the intersections of racism and ableism. I could not find out why so many Black and brown disabled youth ended up interacting with the legal system and being pushed into prisons. So I set out to do that work. I was drawn to critical race theory and disability studies because that is where I got glimpses of youth at the margins. But what I found was what I think many of you have found was disability studies, as Valissa Thompson would say, is too white. And when I was looking at critical race theory, it rarely took in the experiences of people with disabilities. So we worked hard to create disability critical race theory, or DISCRIT. And I use that to study the lives, education, and criminalization and resistance of disabled youth of color. And of course, I learned from so many people. I'm not going to do a huge list, but I really want to name Nirmala Eravallis, Ervelles. I'm sorry, I didn't write that down for the interpreters beforehand. T.L. Lewis, Mia Mingus, and so many more folks that have really deeply influenced me. But I think really what this story is a story of looking for people's lives in the archives, and when you don't find them, creating space for them.
Okay, so I think my own encounter with the kind of institution of disability studies started around 2006 when I was lucky to meet Allison Kafer in the first year of my professorship at UC Berkeley, and she just changed my life immediately. And then soon after that, I found people like Eunjung Kim, Eli Clare, and Nirmala Eravellis in my first SDS conference. So this is the Society for Disability Studies. And that conference was in New York, a kind of famously inaccessible place. But in preparing for this, I just remembered, I had a memory that I thought I would share with you, which kind of is part of why thinking about race and disability feels so important to me. A bunch of us at that conference were making our way down a street in New York, and I was chemically sensitive, and I was wearing a P100 mask, you know, the kind with the gas cartridges, looks pretty dramatic, I guess. And a white man walked behind us and started yelling, "SARS, SARS." So just such a crisp memory, right? But how also wonderful to have solidarity in that learning community and to put the pieces together, right, with people who had their own experiences. Soon after that, my chronic illness got exacerbated. I was housebound, and I think I really started living more and more by crip time. The reason I started doing my work was that I was watching otherwise advanced thinking people using really racialized contagion politics around SARS. And I also experienced people not knowing what to do with my chemical sensitivity because, in a way, I, an Asian person, was out of necessity practicing what looked to them like contagion politics, but it wasn't for me to practice. It was for them to practice. And so it was impossible to imagine writing a book without race and disability being a central component of it. Again, institutionally, I joined the board of SDS with Sami and Julian Annecy to continue the work of moving SDS toward racial and economic justice. Because I think any of us folks of color involved in SDS can, so it's not just really white, right? We can compile an entire book of really upsetting behavior by white scholars at that conference and beyond it. Our solidarity comes from witnessing the harms that are seemingly palpable only to us. Okay, I wrote so much. I'm going to stop there.
Yeah. This is Sami again. I feel like I've told this version or told this story in so many versions so many times. But my entry into disability studies was as one of the, I think, probably earliest folks to actually be taking disability studies classes. I had a disability studies minor that I graduated with in 2008 from Miami University of Ohio, under the mentorship of Kathy McMahon Klosterman, Klosterman. And I took a disability studies class because it fit my schedule and fulfilled an elective credit in my women's studies major. It wasn't because I had any particular interest, it just fit my schedule. But when I took the class, it blew my mind. I was 19. I had just come out to my friends as queer. I felt like I knew everything there was to know about oppression. I was very clear with all the privileged people in my life, the men and the white people and the straight people, that they needed to be working on their stuff and addressing their privilege. And then I got into this disability studies class and I was like, uh-oh, guess what I haven't done? I haven't thought about this at all. And so it made me want to learn more. And as I continued to take classes, there was one semester where I was taking a Black feminist theory class and a disability studies class at the same time. And we were reading Audre Lorde's cancer journals. And we had read some articles about Black women and lupus and HIV. And I was wondering why we were not talking about disability, like from a critical perspective in that class. And no one, the professor, nobody seemed to see what I was talking about. At best, we could get to like medical racism, right? That was the best we could really get to. And then I was realizing that my disability studies class had no Black authors at all whatsoever. And we didn't really talk about race. And so I went to my mentor and I was like, why is this not? It just seems like it should. It seems like Black feminist theory that bursts intersectionality as a concept should be thinking about disability if we're thinking about all these other vectors of oppression. And she was like, well, that's for, the work of new scholars like you to do. And you go get a PhD and you do that research. And I was like, I don't think that's what I want to do. No, thanks. That seems like a lot of work to be in a place that seems terrible, honestly. So no, thank you to that. Obviously, I ultimately did do that. But it took me a while to feel convinced. And part of that was going to the Society for Disability Studies. I went to my first SDS the summer after I graduated from undergrad. And yeah, I danced with Allison Kafer and I sat next to Eli Clare at lunch and I was just enamored at the brilliant and bold and confident and beautiful disabled people surrounding me and the way that people welcomed me and were so excited for the ideas that I had about thinking about the intersections of Blackness and disability. So SDS pulled me in SDS was also a place that broke my heart repeatedly. I think I cried every single conference that I was on the board. Every single one, I cried at some point. It was a hard place to be, but also an important place to be. And so that is where I found my peers and my colleagues doing this kind of work who helped me continue to think and challenged me and made me feel like we could shift the discipline a little bit. And when I put out with the work with Alice that we did for the Disabled Scholars of Color Collective, I hired a graduate student to assist with the work that summer. And I put out a call asking for, this part-time work for a graduate student working in critical race disability studies. And I thought, I'll get like a dozen applications, right? Like, how many folks are doing it? And there were 50 people who applied. Wow. And I thought, not all of these can be good. These must all be AI, fake resumes. And there were a few of those, but they were mostly folks truly doing this work. And so I ended up interviewing like 13 finalists just because I wanted to talk to these grad students around the country doing this work and realizing that without the Society for Disability Studies, they did not have a core place to come and find that intellectual community that I did find there. And so that's kind of what's gotten me to this place. But yeah, entered the field just truly by happenstance and curiosity and a lot of mentors nudging me in a direction that I thought I didn't want to go, but here I am. Yeah.
All right. So it's amazing how this time is moving. So we've looked back. Why don't we talk a bit about the moment we're in today, which is a heavy task, I guess, and the challenge of even touching on this moment today when just pretty much every horrible thing that's happening at this moment in time is existing at the intersection of attacking and criminalizing disabled BIPOC bodies and minds. So how might we show people how we can make these connections to see the common threads, even if we can't logistically talk about all the issues facing us? So, this is an explicit invitation to bring in specific issues if they come to you. Subini first.
Before we do that, I want to just pause and look at you, Mel, and look at you, Sami, and just say, I'm sorry those things happened. Because I think sometimes when we talk about assaults, even like from the field or interpersonally that we experience, because they are coming at us so fast and so furiously, I think we are becoming numb to them. So when you tell us about a racial assault, like I want to pause and just say, I'm sorry that happened. And Sami, when you tell us about just all of the struggles at SDS and just feeling so broken sometimes through the field, I want to say, I'm sorry that happened. I just want to send a lot of love out to the room because I think we are all being ground down under the weight of these assaults. And in this moment, even as we're remembering that, it's oh, I guess, haha, we learn to laugh it off, right? Or we learn to talk about it without all of the emotion that sits on our chests. But I just want to invite that into the room too. That is also things that we can grieve and that we can acknowledge and that we can feel. So I just wanted to recognize that. Yeah, I'm thinking a lot about Mariama Kaba, who is an abolitionist who I follow and listen to and learn from every day. I feel like so much of my own politic has grown out of hers. And so she, talks about this idea as hope is not an emotion, but is something that we practice it and that you have to practice hope every day. And so I really see that as a guiding principle for me. That's really helped me make sense of how to deal with a world that is in a context where we are kind of constantly under assault. So that has really helped me. So as I've kind of talked about already, incarceration is really my focus. And abolition is my answer almost always. Almost always. I'm still like, I always laugh, like can I still be a baby abolitionist? Like we're still growing, I'm still emerging, I don't have all the answers, but the reason because that is so much my focus, everything else like I can touch on that has to do with my disability politic and my racial justice politic. Like today I was thinking, I was writing a petition or signing a petition for like how have reproductive rights just fallen off our platform, right? And how has the death penalty just fallen off our platform? Just watching so many rights that we've had rolled back. And then there's a genocide in Gaza, right? There's all of these things and we can't do everything. And yes, I said genocide. If we want to have that conversation, we can have it. But so I think constantly it's the like, how do I take something in and how do I step away from things? And sometimes when they're kind of when we're just constantly bearing assaults, I think we have to continually ask ourselves that question. Because if I do really believe that Mariama has said this, and I do believe multiple other activists and organizers have said this, academics have said this, but like if we try to do everything, we are going to burn ourselves out. And I think a lot of us might have experienced that during the summer of 2020. I feel like a lot of us were called on to do a lot of racial justice work. A lot of us were pulling disability justice into our racial justice work. We were doing a lot of social media education. We were doing, I was suddenly a public scholar and I was a public activist and I was an academic and I was like had 5 additional jobs. And I think a lot of us got burnt out around that time. And then to watch all of that be rolled back in the last few years has almost in some ways prepared us for this moment, because we can't work ourselves to death, right? Like that's already what the system wants to do. So like, how do we figure out how to balance that? So I feel like I'm way off the question at this point. Like I'm kind of rambling. So I'm going to let somebody else take over, but I think it's a really, really valuable question.
This is Sami again. I think we all, those of us who work in disability studies, work in disability justice, know that we can connect anything back to disability, literally anything. Tell me any issue. I'll tell you about how it disproportionately affects disabled people or predominantly disables more people, right? It creates more disability in certain communities. I think that the challenge is how to make those points in ways that are about building solidarity and coalition building, and not about telling people they're doing their politics or their movement work wrong. I think all communities of movement folks have people who approach things this way, right? But I've seen it so much from white disabled activists yelling at activists of color working on something related to race that has a strong connection to disability, and they're not talking about disability. And white disabled activists decide the way to approach that is to call all those people ableist and try to get them, whatever, canceled, and without really having conversations or offering to figure out how to bridge things, right? Maybe somebody uses a word that we don't use in disability studies, right? That we don't use in our community anymore. It feels outdated, but they don't know that. And sometimes we can't talk about every single thing and we can't fix every single thing. Our list of demands can't be all of it at the same time. Sometimes there are people that are focusing on just getting one concrete thing done, even if you understand it's connected to this and to that. So I think just being able to bridge our like broader theory connections and the practical is really important in this moment. Yeah, that's what I'll say.
Thank you. I'll just add to the both of you's beautiful words. I was listening to you, Sami, and I forgot to say in my own story that what you were saying about the language gap, I guess, around white disability studies and racial justice efforts. I think that gap has really shown up in disability studies, largely in the erasure of the work of many people of color, anti-colonial work, other kinds of work that, again, we all know is connected to disability. And it's been erased from certain privileged histories of white disability studies. And I want to credit Alison Kafer with moving to create a volume of different people's work that was more explicitly thinking both in terms of disability studies and ethnic studies, in part to recover those histories of a disability theorizing and disability activism that had been erased. So it's called Crypt Genealogies. It's co-edited by Allison, Eunjung Kim, Julie Minnick, and myself. I brought a couple of extra copies, so if anyone would like them, or I'm just going to pass them around, but if you want to keep it, keep it. Who shall I? Okay, all right. I don't know. I was thinking about this question, and I don't know why I went in this direction, but I think what I want to say is maybe to myself as well as all of us, it seems to be a moment that calls for all the large scale acts, right? All the big reach acts, all the, if you want to say this, you better say it to 200,000 people. You better win on social media, or, your law should, cover large areas, or whatever. The scale feels such that necessary actions are expected to be large. And I think what I wanted to say, at least to myself, is it's okay to be what you think is small or minor. It's okay to do what you think is small or minor. Because whatever world is important to you is certainly affected by what's happening. And these intersections, I think, BIPOC and other intersections that we've been talking about, I think especially get imagined as little through things like racism, patriarchy, capitalism, even when they're massively important, right? So for me, QTPOC community which is also largely Crip community, is one of those places that gets imagined as small, right? Oh, like you're taking the Venn diagram of all these big groups. What is that, But it's not small in 1,000 ways. And we can push things a certain way, but we actually can't predict the scale or the reach of the effects of our actions. All we have, right, are our bodies, our actions, our circles of care, and our pleasure, which we'll get to. But yeah, I think the sort of words of encouragement were about, let's challenge the stories of scale and smallness that the structures are telling us we are.
Before we go to audience questions, I just want to say, Mel, to that point, and Talila A. Lewis is in the virtual room. So I have a quote from Lewis on this that I won't I'm going to paraphrase. Obviously, do not have it memorized. You have not memorized my entire book. But it is essentially that you cannot measure your wins in a fight against something like for their work prison industrial complex, right? You can't look at work against these massive systems and say the only win is when it's gone, because then you will never feel like you're winning, right? And so the scale of your wins you have to look at as like, yeah, how many people have you helped? How many families have you reunited? And recognizing that help, right? So I think about in work that's happening right now, mutual aid in Madison, like how many people are being fed? How many people are we making sure are not passing out in 95-degree weather because we're making sure that there are supplies there and making sure that we recognize those wins. So both in terms of the scale of our work, but also the scale of our wins. That's yeah, folks should find that quote in my book, which is free, open access. You don't have to buy it. It's just available on the internet. So please go check it out.
We have time for some audience questions. I have a microphone for the room, and my colleague Sandra will come on and read some of the virtual ones. We'll do on and off. Sandra, I'd like to start with a virtual, please.
Of course. We have the first question. How do you think the idea of supercrip is impacted by race?
Sami, you want to answer that one?
I know I have a whole article on on super crips, reevaluating the super crip. And I have a whole article on inspiration, porn, and race, but haven't necessarily put those two together fully. I think that the way we interpret supercrip representations is definitely going to be impacted by race. It adds to the idea of like, wow, you overcame so much if you're like also Black and disabled. What? How'd you do that? So I think there can be that element. But on the flip side, in my article, I talk about how there's actually multiple versions of supercrip, and one of them is like the like achieved it all, like the Christopher Reeve, right? That's like I through all my wealth and access to incredible things, I have now walked one step. Um, and so I also think on the flip side of that, right, who gets represented as super crips, as who gets represented as the disabled people that we're supposed to somehow live up to are people with immense privilege, with racial and financial privilege to allow them to have access to things like quality healthcare, healthcare at all, advanced medicine, sports facilities if they're an athlete, and so how that also impacts who gets represented as that version of Supercrip, I think, is kind of the things that come up for me in this.
I think the one thing I would add to Sami's thoughts is my fear always with super crip is that you can turn that on Black folks and people of color, and we've seen it turned on us when you become superhuman, right, in strength. And when we have police officers describing 14-year-old boys as so huge and so large and so unhuman and almost monstrous, right? So my fear is always if we perpetuate the super crip narrative, there's a reverse side to that. And we always have to think of what that reverse is. And I think there's a danger there. So it not only expects everybody to perform at these really high levels with not the same levels of privilege, but I think it also, for Black folks in particular, Black disabled folks in particular, I think this is how we end up in mental health crises, and we end up getting, kettled, or we end up getting tackled, or we end up getting hit with, sorry, I can't think of the thing. Anyway, so I just think it puts us in danger. I don't see a huge benefit to it for anybody, and it seems like it puts Black folks in particular, Black disabled folks in particular, in danger.
Thank you. We can go to in the room.
Hi, my name is Pia. I'm also a professor, and I wanted to go back to the guiding question for a second, which was about The guiding question was, while we celebrate another Disability Pride Month and 80th anniversary, how and why does our mainstream movement still fail to center BIPOC communities? And I'm kind of curious about like, what do you see as some of the successes and failures, and what needs to happen next, especially when it comes to centering?
Is that you telling me to answer this, Subini? I mean, so many failures. I I'm not a policy person, so this is not like fair. I have just like huge critiques of things that feel limited, but that's how policy works sometimes. Um, I I think that the issues that sometimes get centered in mass, mainstream, predominantly white, very policy oriented disability rights work, right? Disability rights work, not disability justice work, often centers issues that most impact more privileged disabled people because those are the folks who are involved in that work and have the time and the energy to and the money to lobby and form groups and I don't know, rub elbows with people. I don't know how policy gets passed. And I would like to see more mainstream, predominantly white disability rights org stop trying to not stop entirely. Let me take that back. Instead of simply trying to figure out how to hire one disabled person of color and then like add race to the work that you're doing, what would happen if more disability rights organizations made the effort to work with existing racial justice organizations? How would that shift the way that the work happens? How would that shift the priorities of these organizations and these groups? And I'm saying that because so often when I go give talks at college campuses, there's some, student leader of a disabled student organization who says, how do we get more people of color to come to our events? How do we get more people of color to be part of our group? And I say, have you ever been to an event for one of the Black organizations or the Asian organizations or have you been to their events? Have you met with their people? And they're like, well, no, we just want them to come to our events. And I was like, well, maybe it starts with a relationship building. And so if we take that from the the individual scale that happens on college campuses, and I think about it on the national level of like, how do these orgs reach out to connect to one another instead of trying to come up with it in-house with people who have no actual knowledge of racial justice movement work. So less of disability rights folks saying, come to us, but more them going out and going to other people and say, how can we support? How can we help provide a lens to help shift the work you're doing instead of centering their own work? I think that would be an interesting and potentially useful shift.
I just wanted to add, I think one thing that characterizes this moment is actually the withdrawal of kind of ignorant liberal gestures toward diversity. And even those, those token inclusions of people of color aren't happening nearly as much. It's become risky in a new way for these organizations to appear interested in DEI or justice for that matter, So I think it's a particularly tricky moment. It's going to take some craft, to center BIPOC voices, but crafty is all we are. And I think Sami's comment about starting from relationships feels particularly important now.
The only thing I think I would add is like building on what Mel says, I think we have to really think about refusing to let bad faith actors set the terms of the debate and refusing to let those same bad faith actors like limit the demands. I think what we've seen is, like diversity and equity and inclusion were not actually many of our political forefathers, foremothers, forefamilies. It was not our original demands, right? That's what's gotten watered down and what we were able to get into these institutions. And that's why I started by pushing back on the narrative of diversity and visibility. I don't want diversity. I don't want because that's how it can be bastardized. Now we have diverse viewpoints, which is literally just. Sorry, I got excited and turned off the microphone. Where we end up with where we end up where we are now. It's so they're going to roll it back anyway. If they're going to call us radical, no matter what, then let's be radical. Let's like imagine something better than simply being included into a broken system and a broken, being getting a chair at the table where we get to step on other people's necks. Like at some point we have to like really engage this concept of solidarity. I think white disabled groups need to do that. And I also think we need to think deeply about what our demands are and what the debate is. I'm not going to enter a debate where somebody asks me like, how are you going to afford the damage of critical race theory? I'm going to keep teaching critical race theory. And I'm going to tell you, these are all the reasons, like this moment is the reason we need critical race theory more than ever. This moment is the reason we need disability studies more than ever. This isn't so like what I want to see from white disability groups is like a pushing further to the margins instead of pushing further to the center, because the right is going to keep dragging the center rightwards. So why not push to the margins where other folks are?
Sandra, for a virtual.
Yes. What would be your must read book? What suggestions do you have for Crips who are feeling isolated?
Must read book.
Sorry.
It's really hard to pick one. But I think in this particular moment that I am sitting in, I am thinking a lot about care work, because that is the work that I am currently engaged in for protest work. And so that is a book that is a must read for me. And it is one that I come back to and reread and teach essays out of. And I think the second part of that was about like for folks who are feeling isolated, folks are always talking about trying to find community. And I think that sometimes we just mean that really vaguely, but community is based on connections and relationships. And so starting with individual connections is critical for that. And if you are someone that doesn't leave home often, like that can happen by reaching out to someone that you interact with on social media and doing a Zoom call or a phone call. I am a part of an occasional disabled writers group that we get together and just on Zoom writing and working in the same space and talking about what we're working on. but making overtures to folks and reaching out and making plans, while still being flexible and acknowledging that we're overburdened with a lot of things. I think that is a first and critical step, to not feel so alone. We have to engage with people. And they might not always be the people we want initially, right? Like it might take time to find the people that are your people, but finding community is like dating. You just got to keep at it. It's a numbers game until you find the ones that are right for you. And yeah, for me, that ends up not just being about identity, but it's about shared values, right? That's really important for me.
That way we can last. I am terrible about random access book suggestions, but I would love for you to write one. That's my answer to that. And then in terms of isolation, I guess I want to share that I was part of a queer trans people of color arts group for probably 15 years. I kind of can't believe it's ended, but we came together as a group of queer and trans people of color who were engaged in the arts. But over time, we realized that we're absolutely crip, like we were just 100% crip. We weren't necessarily using the language of disability again, right? Because like disability is almost its own institution, but in conversation or in reading each other's work, we sort of realized, of course, right? Disability is within this circle. And so when you mention feeling isolated, I'm just really sorry that you feel isolated. Please know that you're not alone. And maybe one suggestion, right, is to maybe try to share a bit with a person of color who you already know, and you may not have heard the stories that are right there, that may connect you to CRIP people of color community.
For the book, I would recommend Let This Radicalize You by Mariama Kama and Kelly Hayes. I feel like that's a really beautiful book with a lot of lessons around how to take theory and put it into action. And for isolation, I go back to that practice of hope. Get involved with something you care about and spend, you don't have to spend your whole day. Most of us have other things we have to do even if it's not a job, a lot of us have care of ourselves that we have to take care of, or somebody else that we're caring for. And in this moment, there's so many big things. But if you can just find something to do, join a group and go do something with it, 10 minutes a day or a couple times a week or whatever makes sense to you. I'm not trying to give you parameters. You figure out what your parameters are. But I do think like that is how you connect with people. And especially, if it can be something political, or it can be knitting, or it can be, of course, knitting can be political. Sorry, I just saw you knitting. So you're there's somebody knitting in the room for those of you who are here virtually. And obviously knitting can be political. And man, I just feel like I got myself into a mess here. But all I mean by that is like it's whatever you make of it. Like I joined a dance group and I'm not a great dancer and I'm actually pretty bad at it, but it's really fun. And I don't want to be best friends with everybody in it, but I met one person I hang out with, and so I think it's also that, right? It's like figuring out how to do something in community. Like if we're all going to demand community, then we have to make an effort to be in community. And community is not like this perfect idealistic. Community is messy. Community is annoying. We are like it is doing the thing we don't want to do. A lot of times I do not want to leave my house. So like I think you also have to figure out like where can we put, if you can physically or mentally or emotionally push yourself out of your comfort zone, not in a way that risks your health or anything else, but like some of that might be useful too. So just really thinking about how do we create the situations that we need to thrive, I think makes a huge difference.
So there are lots of questions in the room and online, but we're actually going to push our panelists to go through a few more of theirs that they have prepared. There was one question asking for it to be said again what SDS stands for. So that's the Society for Disability Studies. And I'll pass it back to Subini.
Sorry, I got to pull up the questions again.
Oh, wait, what? What
We
are you
have
supposed to do?
Okay. This series was framed around Alice Wong's Disabled Oracle Society with the motto, "We are the past, we are the present, we are the future, we are forever." How do you understand the idea of disabled oracles and the people and ideas who will take disabled people into the future? And Sami, you're up first. I'm sorry, because I feel like I keep tossing questions at you when I don't answer them first, but you really are up first this time.
Yeah. When I think about disabled oracles, I think about the way that disabled folks see things coming sooner because we're impacted faster, right? I think about the fact that when COVID first hit, I knew about different types of high quality masks because of how many disabled people I knew in the Bay Area who use masks for wildfires, right? I knew about mass distribution. Like I knew things because I am in disabled community that prepared me for moments of disaster, right? Um, and I think because so many of us have to look ahead, have to plan ahead, have to think about all the barriers and the struggles we might face in order to decide if we can even go somewhere, leave our homes, we can see down the line a little bit further in some ways. And so for me, that is like naming that ability and using it, but also making sure that folks understand that it is coming from us and our lived experiences, and that we can't be left behind in the process, right? We can't be abandoned to climate catastrophe. And so it shouldn't be the only way in which we like value disabled people, but I think often our insights are so deeply discounted or thought as I think Mel said much earlier, like niche, right? Only applies to us and doesn't actually benefit people beyond the disabled community, when in fact so much of what has been developed inside of disability community around access benefits so many people, and the knowledge we have benefits so many people. So yeah, that's how we think about disabled oracles, that ability to just be a couple steps ahead.
Turned on the mic. Well, Sami, I just love what you said. So I say I second what you just said. And I'm just having a thought about the kinds of technology that are under intensive development right now, especially here in the Bay Area, and what kinds of futures they're trying to foretell. And I'm pretty sure that they're trying to foretell a future that doesn't include disabled people. And I'm taking my lead from Alison Kafer and many other people on this, but somehow, right, I think there needs to be more open discussion about the kinds of futurity that are being produced and their relationship to disability. We need to put a stop to the narratives that are about the eradication of disability, even if, right, there may be some wishes for less suffering. And yeah, I'm not exactly sure how to go about it, but I feel very alert to what is happening in that regard.
I think I would like to add that, similar to what Mel was saying, like I think if we understand that, like, I'm going to quote or I'm going to paraphrase Octavia Butler, and I'm going to be very careful because Sami is an Octavia Butler scholar. So I'm always like, oh no. So Sami can tell me if I'm getting it wrong. But I remember reading one of her interviews where she says, like, she's not an oracle, which is wild because if you read Parable of the Sower right now, you're like, damn. But she says she's not. She says, like, what she did was study history, look at where we were going, and look into the future if that had been, if we continued to go in that direction without any solid resistance. And so that is what I think an oracle is. That's what Alice did too. And that's what made her an amazing oracle. I don't think, I mean, beyond mythology, I don't think there is an oracle. Like, I don't think there are people who just magically have the answer. It's people who are paying attention. And I agree with, Sami, when we're talking about like what Du Bois talked about with second sight, right? Like Black folks have a second sight because they have had to understand the way the world works, and the systemic racism and how it functions in the world. But I want to also challenge us, right? Because I think a lot of us have really like taken up intersectionality and identity politics, and I think they've been deeply misunderstood, right? So intersectionality is not about the stacking of identities to see who is the most oppressed. It is about understanding intersecting systems of oppression and how they land differently in different people's lives. So if we understand that, that can actually really help us move like towards a oracle type stance of where we look at. And so to me, that's so important because it's not about, oh, I've got the one Black person on my board and they told me that it's okay to use AI, right? Because that's what I'm starting to hear. Oh, there's one disabled person who needs to use it for their accommodation needs. So now everybody can use it, right? But that isn't talking about systems. That's not talking about, right? So we just need to move this like one person kind of, I've got a representative from this group and so now we can do this thing because they okayed it. That's not the goal either, right? It's to find this complicated middle section where we are looking at the way systems work. And that is what it means to be an oracle, is using the history and the present to see where we're going in the future if we do not disrupt the injustice we're facing today.
Okay, last one. Final tribute to Alice. She always reminded us to make time for pleasure, whether that's pleasure from food, pleasure from touch, pleasure from music, pleasure from sex, and to not shy away from maximalism even when times are hard. I feel like every time I was on a Zoom with her, we both had on like bright red lipstick. Um, and, a lot of my work right now is on pleasure and pleasure activism, especially as enacted by multiply marginalized disabled folks. And so we want to end with thinking about pleasure and joy. So how are you all finding pleasure and joy in these times? And what does that look like for you?
So I want us to start, but I also want to hear from everyone here. I love to laugh. I love to eat. But that line, they told me it was okay to use AI. That would be so good in a like a sitcom or something. Wouldn't it? Yeah. And I'm actually working on a stand-up routine. Just letting you know. I'm not sure when it's going to come out. But the kind of laughing I've done, right, with my communities has felt the richest because I think my comrades have felt like so many of the layers, so many of the layers that pack into something funny that others' humor actually does violence to, right? So there's something beautifully healing about these forms of humor. And I'll just add that I love spending time in my garden every day, tending to plants, helping them grow food crops, flowers. There's nothing like it. And coming out into the sun every morning and looking at the babies and the elders, there's nothing like it. So that's what I do for pleasure.
I've already mentioned it a little bit, but just to give you some context, I've been hospitalized 3 times in the past 6 years. And each time my body has broken in some new way. My body finds new creative ways to break down. And I've had to, and over the years, I've become more and more disabled. And in that process of breaking down, for some reason, I have found a deep, of course, I want to be honest and not make it all sound positive, a deep shame, a deep struggle, a deep, deep frustration with my body. But I've also, in the last 6 years, because it keeps coming back in these different ways, I keep joking, I'm on rebuild number 3, but in some ways, it's really made me fall in love with my body. I've really learned to listen to my body in a way that I didn't 10 years ago because I didn't need to. I've learned how to enjoy when I have the movement I want to move, and when I can't have it, I've started to learn to accept it, which before I would have just driven myself into the ground. So for me, movement has become medicine in the ways that I can move in different days. So some days it's dance, some days it's running, some days it's yoga, some days it's laying on my bed. And I have to take all of that together. And I know people will hear that and say, oh, you're not that disabled, because that's the other fun game people like to play. How disabled are you? But I don't to me, that game has got exhausting. It depends on the moment. It depends on the minute, because disability is not something that is fixed ever. It's not fixed in time. It's not fixed in space. It's not fixed in my body. So for me, I've taken so much pleasure in when my body can do things I want it to do and when it can't. And what do I have to treat? How do I treat my body in particular ways? So that's actually been this really beautiful experience for me. So I've really started to take pleasure in that. And then when I'm in the right space, then I can dance with my friends. I can go for a run. I can lift weights. And sometimes it's being alone with my body. And that's a really special moment too. So I think pleasure is found in the corporeal experience that I'm having right now.
I will close us out by saying that right now, for me, pleasure is coming from anytime I can be in or on water, whether that's a kayak or in a pool, even sitting by the lake. It is coming from being able to support my community through mutual aid. And it is coming from being around kids. I don't have kids, don't want kids, yuck, but I'm a great auntie. Great auntie. And being around my friends' kids and my partner's kids. And it's a pleasure, it's a delight, and it keeps me hopeful, because the way that these kids talk about things going on in the world is pretty cool. And so that gives me a lot of hope, which brings me a lot of pleasure. And it helps me just remember why we do what we do.
Well, everyone, if you would please join me in giving a round of applause to our panelists. Sami, our mics work really well, but you have to trust that there is, in fact, plenty of applause you're not hearing. Thank you so much. We are so grateful to be able to bring this into Disability Pride Month for our final week of celebration, and drawing a lot of complexity to that celebration with all the many places you took us to today, and bringing in the legacy of our ancestors as well. I want to thank the people who made this possible. Our huge gratitude to John D. and Catherine T. MacArthur Foundation for including us in their series, Defying Boundaries, MacArthur Fellows at 45. This is also a program run by the San Francisco Disability Cultural Center. That is a program of LC and Lily Cox, Haven of Hope, with financial contributions from the City of San Francisco's Human Service Agency's Department of Disability and Aging Services. This is also the moment I thank our interpreting team after all those names. Thank you. And lastly, to help our funder today, just to give you a heads up, normally the DCC sends a survey out. That will still head out to you, but the MacArthur Foundation also asks for a survey. It's a great opportunity to have your voice heard, that disabled conversations should be part of the work. So we have that survey around the room. My colleague Sandra is also dropping it in the chat if you're virtual. So if you have a few extra moments and spoons to fill it out, we would really appreciate it. If you're staying for our in-person reception, we're going to move the food over. Our patio folks, we're going to ask you to shuffle around first as we make a little extra space. And we're going to have masks off for that portion of the event. So we'll be getting you eating shortly. Virtual folks, thank you so much for being with us. Sami, thank you so much for being with us. And we are so grateful to you all for making this happen. Thank you and good night.